Once upon a time, a head monk and his disciple stepped out of the hut for a walk. While walking, both of them reached a very pleasant place. It was winter time, and the place was very captivating. Snowflakes were floating down the sky like tiny dancers, creating a calm and ethereal atmosphere. The snow, white as a pearl, was laying a soft, beautiful layer over the ground. The bare branches of the trees were laden with snow. In the middle, fir and pine trees were spreading the beautiful greenery, crowned with a delicate frosting of snow. The air was crisp and clear, tingling against their cheeks and filling their lungs with a refreshing chill. The only sounds were the crunching of snow, the occasional chirping of birds, and the soft whisper of the wind. As they walked through the winter wonderland, the head monk and his disciple paused to witness the beauty of their surroundings. Suddenly, the disciple spoke up. "Master, even in this beautiful moment, I'm struggling with racing thoughts within my mind. What should I do?" The head monk turned towards his disciple and said in a soft and measured tone, "Son, our mind is like the snowflakes falling around us, constantly changing and moving. If we cling to each flake, trying to hold on to them, then we will become overwhelmed and lost. Instead, we must be like the empty sky, allowing each flake to pass through us without any attachment." The disciple looked at the sky, watching the snowflakes dance and twirl. Then he said, "But master, if we let go of each flake, then how do we navigate the world?" The head monk stopped, smiled and said, "When the mind is open and empty like the sky, we can see the path ahead clearly. We become one with our surroundings. The distinction between the external world and our internal mind disappears. Past, present and future become one, and we are free to wander without any attachment or complications." When life hurts, stop thinking. When most people hear that statement, their logical mind's first reaction is that it doesn't make sense. Ever since we are first born into this world, we experience different hardships that come with different types of negative emotions. As humans, we are wired in a way that makes us want to experience as little negative emotion as possible. We have many systems in our brains that have evolved over thousands of years in order to survive and live as efficiently as possible. One of such systems is our logical thinking. Every time we experience unpleasant emotion, we naturally try to identify its cause and, if possible, eliminate it. But oftentimes, eliminating the cause is thought to bring about much more pain than we are able to go through. It is then that we distract ourselves or run away from the problem. We numb ourselves with many drugs civilization supplies us with, such as alcohol, junk food, social media, video games, and so on. It seems like we are presented two possible ways of dealing with the pain, either eliminating the cause of negative emotion or distracting ourselves from it. In both of those cases, we think how we can make the pain stop. The thinking comes to us naturally. Nonetheless, this is not another video that intends to praise people who actually solve their problems and criticize the ones who distract themselves and run away from them. There is genuinely nothing wrong with either of those ways of dealing with your problems. However, we generally don't seem to be aware that there is actually a third path, a third way of reacting to the suffering we experience. That is, acknowledging the hardship and simply letting it be, noticing the suffering without any judgment whatsoever, and accepting that in the current moment it is a part of your life. This approach is quite unusual compared to the way we normally operate in the world. Naturally, when we experience pain, we think to ourselves how we can solve the problem or how we can distract ourselves from it. In both of those cases, we stand to gain something from our actions, either the elimination of the cause of the pain or numbing the pain. No matter if you choose to solve your problem or distract yourself from it, the end goal is to make the suffering cease. But both of those methods work only until something else starts to cause pain in your life. When that happens, the question of how to deal with our pain arises again. It is a vicious, never-ending cycle of trying to escape suffering. Since the beginning of our race, we humans have always dreamed of a world without suffering. We tell ourselves stories of how after death we will all meet in a special place, be it Christian paradise, Muslim Jannah, or the Hindu Svarga. But in Buddhism, heaven is not a place. The Buddhist equivalent of heaven is nirvana. But nirvana is not a place, but rather a state of mind, and the only place we can achieve it in is this earth. But let's focus on Buddhism as a philosophy. Let's start from the beginning. The Buddha exclaimed, "Life is pain." More or less, our whole lives can be said to be the experiencing of and the dealing with different forms of suffering. We work so that we can eat, so our stomachs don't hurt. We acquire things so that we don't feel inferior to others, and so on. By definition, philosophy is the study of the fundamental nature of existence. So, if existence is pain, philosophy can be said to be the study of what to do with that suffering, what the meaning and the use of that suffering is. Nonetheless, Zen Buddhism doesn't focus on that at all. Almost all philosophy is based on the assumption that there must be some kind of meaning to our lives. As intelligent beings, we are used to things being for something. It is such a natural and obvious thing to us that we never stop and notice where that urge for meaning is coming from, and whether or not it is truly the thing we should base our existence on. So, where does the need for meaning to our suffering come from? It comes from the logical mind. It manifests itself in thoughts. Let's say you're putting effort into your life. For many years, you simply do the things that you do. When you feel pain, you obviously don't enjoy that experience, but you simply carry on with your task, as the unpleasant feeling goes away with time. But one day, a thought pops up in your head. What is the meaning of this? Every time I push through the pain, it comes back another day. What am I doing all of this for? With that thought, the perspective on your existence you had until that point changes completely. That one thought given to you by your mind is enough to disturb all the serenity and acceptance of life you had before. However, with time, you find that no thought is able to restore that serenity. No matter what you tell yourself, what you think to yourself, logically speaking, there is no point to life, because we'll all die anyway. That may not be the exact experience of all people, but a lot of us struggle with that exact predicament. Our mind, our thoughts, have power enough to disturb our peace, but never enough to restore it once and for all. That is exactly what Zen yogins have discovered. The Zen teaching has evolved over many generations of monks, and the most profound, final doctrine they have put together is the doctrine of no mind. That doctrine is the third way of dealing with suffering. The essence of this doctrine is as follows. I establish no thoughtness as the principle, formlessness as the body, and abodelessness as the source. End quote. As said before, the urge for meaning comes from our earthly minds, and it manifests itself in thoughts. So, simply put, if one is thoroughly versed in the doctrine of no mind, then he has no thoughts. If he has no thoughts, then he transcends the duality of meaning and no meaning, because the idea of meaning comes from the thinking mind. At first, this statement may seem incredibly distant and available only to the 1 in a million truly enlightened ones. However, as we are about to explain, it is not so much of a distant, unacquirable state, and not much at all is needed for it to start changing your perspective on life and suffering. A well-known Zen master and philosopher, Matsu, once said, "One's everyday thought is the Tao." It is an unfathomably simple statement, yet it explains the third way of dealing with suffering perfectly. By one's everyday thought is meant every thought that you have, including the awareness that you have about life being suffering. By the Tao is meant, amongst other things, the essence, the truth, and the key to dealing with that suffering. So, in other words, the feeling and awareness of the suffering is all that is needed to overcome the suffering. The natural reaction to pain is to do something about it. As said before, either get rid of whatever causes us suffering, or get rid of the suffering by indulging in pleasurable activities. But even if we get rid of pain for the time being, eventually it is sure to come back in one way or another. Zen teaches us that feeling hurt is a natural part of life, and instead of rejecting it, revolting against it, we should simply let ourselves feel it. Just like the master in the Zen story from the beginning said, if we are to be free and truly enjoy beautiful moments, we must learn to let all thoughts pass, just like snowflakes falling on the ground. We must accept that no matter what we do, the nature of humans and of the world is such that difficulties will come anyway. Only after the accepting of that fact can we enter onto the true path to escaping suffering, which is the state and the mindset of no attachment. A bodhisattva does not cling to the illusion of separate individuality, or ego entity, or personal identification. In reality, there is no I who liberates, and no they who are liberated. Furthermore, Subhuti, a bodhisattva should be detached from all desires, whether they be for the sight, the sound, the smell, the touch, the taste, or whether they be for leading multitudes to enlightenment. A bodhisattva does not savor ambition. End quote. This quote by the Buddha himself from the Diamond Sutra goes much deeper into the doctrine of no mind than just the acceptance of suffering as an inevitable part of life and not harboring any thoughts as to why it is so, or how we can get rid of our pain. It shows us a completely new reality, the key to which is the absence of all desire. Up until this point, we have talked about how when we feel hurt, we can simply let ourselves be hurt, and we don't need to do anything about it. This mindset lets us be more in accord with the nature of life as a whole, as opposed to constantly fighting against it. Just the same, when the Buddha says we should be detached from all desires, he means that any time we have any thought, any time we feel anything, we should simply accept it and let it pass, not only when it comes to suffering, but when it comes to everything. That seems even more distant and unattainable than the detachment from suffering. After all, how can we possibly want to be detached from feelings like joy or happiness too, from thoughts like this life is beautiful and I wish it could go on forever? Nonetheless, the wisdom, the freedom that comes from a completely detached state of mind is the state of supreme perfect enlightenment itself. Life is suffering. Ordinarily, when we experience it, we think of ways to get rid of it, either by resolving the thing that causes us to feel that way, or by countering the negative emotions with positive ones. However, both of those ways only work until the next difficulty comes around and causes us to feel pain again. Nonetheless, Zen Buddhism proposes a third solution in the form of detachment and acceptance, as opposed to thinking about how we can solve all of our problems and never feel pain again, as opposed to thinking that there is no point to life. The solution is not in our thoughts at all. It is in letting ourselves feel the pain in the moment, have thoughts about it, but acknowledging that it is a natural part of our lives and simply letting it pass. That is what it means to be detached from suffering. Detachment is the very basis of Buddhist philosophy when applied to all thoughts and all of the experience of life, as opposed to just suffering and thoroughly and absolutely mastered. Detachment allows us to enter a state of no mind, in which, by not trying to escape suffering, you escape all suffering.